And are you doing the lightning talks as well?
Is it my internet or your internet that's bad? I really hope it's not mine.
It's not yours. I can hear you fine.
Oh.
All right. I'll go back off. Hope it goes well. And if you need anything, just let us know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I need 1 more minute, please.
We are glad to have you here. Today we are going to do sessions on women empowerment. So we'll hear a lot from people who've been working on women empowerment using Earth observation data and using data and making data accessible to different communities in different formats and in different ways. So as it is customary in various indigenous cultures for an elder or a community leader to start sessions, usually in prayers, in songs, or in invocations, today we are privileged to be joined by Ernesto, who is an elder from the indigenous Suar community in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Thank you.
Yamay tumin kwarod no nimeshwar nakaswar asan atumi jahan gana matatum nanuna e chamu henja nunga nagat kamun maya har manuna nakas kambuni no hu pa na imiata sa nakas ka kusan atumi tita sa pira hai vi posmaron vi pohoteron soal cur macam ini ya, soal cur ruk cuaca, kamu ni apa sar? Bunyi nam purus ke ikan, waris, mangkis kamu ni mana em gajurum ni sih. Ain sar suama tesa kamu ni ada irun awal. Bi nikas suama rusan, suama tejem. Apa sih punya ai benar? Tuhim ya kan suama ni kamu ni mana? Tomasar, ya mai shain seri. Sungguh kadam sungguh, yahania nekaste sungguh tamatesha, ainsa kambunin maya hai, suamari, tomasan, yahan kan masyakurasan isu che, atumin yahan kan amsata nungkan nakat kamu matatum nanuna, tuma isu san icha, suati kya, tarime suati kya, begitu matatehi, angkan nunggasha musik camonam, Malaysia seas canam, pinter-nam, insan, tomasan atumi seah roman. Hui kodo no so I apachiri ay amigri, matat nanut in cianen anangram he, I narin yahan gana kasar, kuican senior, akika senior, ningi roman tatanya kui, yamai ki isha, atumi yahan manyanung matatum nanuna. Soal cinca nakak wali kusen get arum. Isha utsumahi. Wali tsuma uruka tsuma. Nikas kirka. Unimet nom. Ika tsuma kuitja. Akikja. Nu utsumahi. Ika yumate itarcha. Ika yumate shmashta kakahi. Ni hamchisha. Matiyash. Wali kakacheta. Ika takakehi. Toba nikasi akikrinja utsuma moka. Nikasi uchi niyati. Nu utsumahi. Tomasan amigro, iré charo, nunca me cas punkerno, nunca mañana punkerno, por eso se hace chomona, oasan, atomin y piagroma. Jahan gana matat na, pues nika hai, jahan gana ayanisha, mas nunca maya, hui, vi pomon ho yamai cuadro nunca vi kama arut baiki, via comunidad tuka, virus kamoka. Tayo ay nyawe, nika nyawe, tomasan yamai sa tumyasha, nika chubiana sa, tumyasha. Seah rumah irai carum, suara nar kami akan samiki te, kasminya suara nari enggak, samiki cebika.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to have this session in two parts. Initially we'll have a speaker session for about 20 or so minutes, and then we'll later have a lightning talk session. So we'll have about 4 speakers for this session. I'd like us to make use of the chat section of our Blue Jeans meeting to ask questions to the speaker while they're speaking. We can ask these questions later on. I think I'd prefer us to have an open discussion immediately after all the speakers speak. So please post your questions in the chat box. So our first speaker for the day is Robbie Hood. Robbie Hood is an amazing woman who's an atmospheric scientist who was also the first director of NOAA, of NOAA's Unmanned Aircraft System program. She's a citizen of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, And the title of her talk today is A Storyteller with Data. Welcome, Dr. Robbie.
Here, Robbie Hood, G-Delagi. Hello, my name is Robbie Hood, and I'm Cherokee. I'm also a mother and a meteorologist who's married to a meteorologist. In fact, some of you may know my husband, Michael Goodman. He's attended GEO summits in the past, and he sends his greetings of shalom to all of you. So I was really honored to be invited to speak to you about my career as an Indigenous scientist who has worked with Earth observations for nearly 40 years. But to get started, I need to tell you a little bit about my family because they really helped shape my career as a scientist. I was raised as a small town girl in Neosho, Missouri, in the United States. My father worked for Rocketdyne, which built the rocket engines for the Apollo space program run by NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration. These rocket engines were manufactured in California and then shipped to Missouri, where they were performance tested before being delivered to NASA. Because of my dad, I learned to understand the possibility and excitement of working with new technology in a small town. My Cherokee heritage comes from my mother, who was a wonderful storyteller and had superior people skills. She taught me at an early age to pay attention to body language and to really listen to what people were saying so you truly understood what they thought and felt. So today I'm called a meteorologist or an atmospheric scientist, but thanks to my parents, I'm actually a storyteller with data. I have a master's degree in meteorology and started my career as a scientific programmer. Today you would call me a girl who codes. My husband and I both got jobs at NASA early in our marriage, and we have both worked with Earth observations for the bulk of our careers. He liked the information management side of the house, but I was drawn to testing new technology during field campaigns. I've worked with aircraft that fly so high at 20 kilometers that the only person on board is a pilot in an astronaut suit. I've also flown onboard aircraft myself, carrying people and instruments at 12 kilometers as we observe storms and hurricanes. I've learned along the way that I really like field campaigns because I like the people aspect of working with so many different types of scientists, engineers, pilots, and other people. All of us were working together to tell a story about the weather. During my 21 years at NASA, I supported many of the new rainfall and snow observing sensors NASA was deploying at that time. This work involves studying tropical rainfall and hurricanes and storms in places like Brazil, Costa Rica, Cape Verde, Australia, the Marshall Islands, and of course the southeastern United States. During my career, my jobs progressed from being a coder to being a field scientist, leading a team of scientists and engineers supporting the aircraft remote sensors. And from there, I progressed to being a mission scientist, leading large international field campaigns using satellites, aircraft, and field networks to collect three-dimensional data of storms and hurricanes. My field work was exciting and challenging, and visiting those exotic places was fascinating. But I was always frustrated with the limitations of seeing data in real time. Whenever we sent the high-altitude aircraft to look at storms over the ocean, we had to wait for the pilot to come back before we could actually see the data. And I have to admit, even though it was fun flying across the tops of hurricanes at 12 kilometers, I was always frustrated that I couldn't see both the aircraft data, the satellite data, and the surface-based data at the same time. I always wanted to be able to see it, but we always had to wait till we got back on the ground to look at the data. So my growing wish was to be able to sit in one place and look at satellite, aircraft, and surface-based data all together, because I always felt that you couldn't tell the real story until you connect the dots between the data observations. And that's how I became interested in unmanned aircraft systems, or drones. I really liked the thought of a drone flying out and sending you data back to you while it was flying. So I took a job at NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and I was the director of the UAS program when it first got started. And this program was set up to match UAS capabilities to the needs of the NOAA scientists. I'm very proud that the NOAA UAS program was able to fund a large field demonstration of a high-altitude aircraft flying at 20 kilometers, carrying remote sensors over hurricanes and relaying that data back to operational hurricane forecasters. At last, I was finally able to sit in one location and see multiple sources of hurricane data brought together for real-time visualization. My NOAA work also included working with scientists who were really more interested in flying UAS at 100 to 200 meters above the surface. These scientists used UAS to study whale migrations, oil spill damage, flooded rivers, methane gas, and sea ice. So as I look back at my career, I see that I was never driven by one key science question. I was always drawn to new technology like my dad. I also enjoyed working with people, groups of people, to collect data that we could all share and to tell a story of what we'd observed. I'm a storyteller like my mom. And then as a scientist, I can see that being Indigenous helped me become a storyteller with data. So after 9 years at NASA, I've retired, and I've started planning a new adventure for myself, and that is to work with tribal and rural communities to help develop local observing networks using low-cost sensors deployed from either surface-based platforms or drones. I think affordable local observing networks will help communities connect the dots to other GEO observations. I also think these networks will help with local decision-making and foster economic opportunities. Of course, consistent internet access is critical for these ideas to truly be successful in local communities. So in summary, I want to be able to encourage the next generation of storytellers with data who want to live and work in small towns, but desire ready access to multiple GEO observations so to better inform their communities and to tell their stories. So please feel free to reach out to me if you would like to share some ideas. I posted my contact information on the Slack page. Wado, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Dr. Robin. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? I don't see any questions in chat, but I see a question that I have a question that I'll hold on to till the end of the presentations. Thank you, Dr. Robbie. So our next speaker today is Maria. Maria is a 2020 Stanford Bright Award winner, the director-elect of the Land of Snow Leopard Network, and executive director of the Baikal Buryat Center of Indigenous Culture. Maria is from the Ekrit tribe in the Republic of Buryat, Russia. Welcome, Maria. We look forward to learning from you.
Greetings. My name is Maria Arunova. I'm from Republic of Buryatia, Russia. My people are called Buryat Mongols, and we are indigenous to the Lake Baikal region, just north of the Russian-Mongolian border. I come from the Ikhirit tribe on my father's side and Sagan Khangodar clan on my mother's side. I was born into a family of indigenous, environmental, and cultural activists. I was very fortunate to complete my education at Harvard and Cambridge universities. Since 2015, I have been serving as the executive director for the Baikal Buryat Center for Indigenous Cultures that is dedicated to the preservation of traditional knowledge, wisdom, spirituality, and practices of indigenous peoples and local communities of the Baikal region. We are committed to the advancement of bicultural approaches to nature conservation with a focus on sacred totemic species, reintroduction of Aboriginal cattle back to the Buryat landscapes, and strengthening of intergenerational knowledge exchange. In 2019, I was elected to be the next leader of the Land of Snow Leopard Network, or LOSL. Today, I would like to talk about this unique conservation collaboration. The snow leopard range extends throughout 12 countries in Central, Inner, and South Asia. As you can imagine, this area is very diverse in traditions, culture, and political contexts. The Land of Snow Leopard Network is an inspiring example of a multinational collaboration working together across the northern half of the indicated range, from the Pamirs in Tajikistan, Tian Shan in Kyrgyzstan, and the Altai and Sayan ranges in Mongolia and Russian Federation. The work of LOSL is rooted in the indigenous understanding of the sacredness, cultural, and environmental significance of the snow leopard across Central and Inner Asia. Indigenous people in this region relate to the snow leopard as the protector and guardian of sacred mountains, a unifying force and source of spiritual power and wisdom. It is also an important indicator of ecological health of mountain landscapes and cultural integrity of their communities. LOSL brings together more than 100 members with strong local institutional capacity and deep commitment to our intrinsic responsibility for guardianship of Mother Earth. LOSL enabled the direct involvement of indigenous cultural practitioners in high-level planning for snow leopard survival. Indigenous cultural practitioners are shamans, sacred site guardians, respected leaders of regional faiths, and revered elders, all passionate about integrating the survival of the snow leopard with the survival of snow leopard cultures, and all finding themselves responsible for the bringing of the next generation a traditional value system of reverence for nature. LOSL also includes people working for cultural and environmental conservation, lifelong herders and traditional hunters who know and practice ancestral art of sustenance hunting, indigenous educators, historians, and the NGOs, as well as schools and children's nature conservation clubs. Our structure is composed of country teams led by in-country coordinators. Today, there are eight in-country coordinators responsible for operation and coordination of activities on country and sub-regional levels. They go out into the field and work with local communities. And I'm pleased to say that half of the country coordinators are amazing indigenous and local women who are incredibly accomplished in the fields. One of the fine examples of our collaboration is the expansion of the Snow Leopard Festival in Altai Republic to other regions such as Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. The LOSL network developed a custom mobile application to facilitate monitoring and data collection for bicultural and cultural information about snow leopards and report poaching incidents. Such an app can greatly facilitate gathering information among local people across such a vast and remote landscape. Currently, our network is working on expanding a highly successful nomadic trunk education project in all of our areas. The Land of Snow Leopard Network provides a unique approach to community-based snow leopard conservation, blending traditional ecological knowledge and Western science. Since LOSL began working with the communities across Central Asia, there have been multiple success stories of human-wildlife coexistence and rural communities champion wildlife. In 2018, 3 local communities in Shugnan, Tajikistan, suffered from snow leopard attacks on their domestic animals. More than 50 goats, sheep, and young cattle were killed or deadly wounded. Affected families lost all their livestock, hence their entire life support systems collapsed. Retaliation killing would have been a normal finale to the sinister accidents. However, livestock owners decided to set free the captured predators. Local communities brought the snow leopards to secluded areas and released them in peace. There have been 16 such incidents in Tajikistan and at least 1 reported by herder in Kyrgyzstan of snow leopards being released back into the wild by local communities instead of being killed after they were caught raiding livestock. People say that even a few years ago, such acts of mercy wouldn't be possible. Kurban Alamshoyev, Tajikistan coordinator, and his team Kohoy Pamir work with local communities to celebrate International Snow Leopard Day and promote other education programs with cultural and spiritual awareness that have significant impact, increasing pride in wildlife and nature. A Kyrgyz spiritual leader, Raburkul Raimbekov, one of the founding members of LOSL, nominated me to be the network's director, and this nomination was supported by all key members of our network. I believe that this honor was bestowed upon me not only because of my education in elite Western universities, but also due to my commitment to indigenous values and holistic conservation approaches. This is a tremendous responsibility, and it's not easy to represent such a powerful and unprecedented conservation initiative. I believe that relying on and practicing my traditional Buryat culture is key to successfully help lead our incredible network. I would like to express my gratitude and words of admiration to conservation practitioners worldwide, but especially to the indigenous female conservationists. Thank you, and together we can do it.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. I still think we should hold up our questions and then we can ask all the questions towards the end of this first speaker session. So So our next speaker is Gwen Bridge. Gwen Bridge is the principal of Gwen Bridge Consulting, which is an 100% Indigenous women-owned certified Aboriginal business. She's going to be speaking to us about framing agreements for the use of traditional and scientific Earth observation data in Indigenous land management. Thank you. Welcome, Gwen.
My name is Gwen Bridge, and I live in British Columbia, Canada. I'm a member of the Saddle Lake Cree Nation. I'd like to thank the GEO Indigenous Summit organizers for inviting me to share my experiences as it relates to women's empowerment, particularly James Rattling-Leaf, who made me aware of this exciting summit. I'm happy to be here. So I'll talk a little bit about my background, my work and experiences in relation to ensuring equality in data and information use in land management, and my thoughts about how to continue to empower Indigenous communities to shape the evolution of a better society. Thank you for being with me and for listening. I'll start by sharing what I, as an Indigenous woman in Canada, have been doing to define roles for information, both scientific and Indigenous, in government-to-government relationships. I do it by negotiating agreements which set the parameters for knowledge use in collaborative land management, setting the stage to ensure space for collaborative data analysis and use. All of these relationships are developed in the context of spatial and place-based information. One agreement in development equally references both Canadian and Indigenous law. The Indigenous law is the law of the land. The people are guided by the law and the animals, the actual land. Teachings from the land and life is what guides human behavior. Understanding that it is the land itself which provides constraints on behavior is a new concept for Canadians to understand. The constraints on behavior in Canadian society are not derived from land-based knowledge. They are essentially based on laws, philosophies, perspectives, and mores developed in the Christian monarchy in England. I am lucky to be participating in the continued evolution of legal and policy environments which reflect Indigenous values and laws, with the vision of shifting the nature of society and the authority of earth-based knowledge towards equality. Indigenous knowledge, that is essentially Indigenous law, and earth science, that is essentially information, are really different in application. In Western science, the actual earth-based knowledge has very little authority in society. Science is used to inform policy. It is the policy in turn which guides behavior. Policy is discretionary. It may or may not contain or be informed by the full complement of earth knowledge. In those Indigenous societies I have worked for, and I'm not espousing a pan-Indigenous framework, earth observation knowledge has authority. The story of the land and animals are the law of the land. There is no policy validation loop for the knowledge required, as there is in Western society. So how do I negotiate agreements which enable better use of information? I do have an empowerment manifesto, but essentially this work is facilitated by understanding both traditional and scientific ways of knowing. I have a master's of science, and this has helped me be able to have conversations that compare, contrast, and assert different ideas with an understanding of the philosophical underpinnings of the scientific method. Additionally, understanding different societal structures in the context of how law and knowledge guide society has been important. Understanding that the problems we seem to face with the integration of traditional Indigenous knowledge with science is not because of the nature of understanding. They are both based on observing the earth, but because of the difference in authority the knowledge possesses in society. Understanding these concepts has created the ability to communicate the inherent credibility and validity of Indigenous knowledge to those who have a different understanding. Ultimately, as understanding is expanded and space created in agreements, this enables the cultural prerogatives of the unique Indigenous society to be better manifested in the current world, including women's activities and knowledge. The more expansive the agreements are in including reference to this parallel legislative framework, the better the opportunities are for women and men to continue to apply their land relationship knowledge through cultural practice. I said I'd talk about the role of Earth observation data in relation to Indigenous women's empowerment. One observation of these less assimilated communities I have worked for, the notion of women's empowerment is somewhat confusing. Women have power, and I mean this not as power per se, but to relay that this question of subjugation to male authority is not one which is quite understood. Of course, we recognize it and are subjected to it in the broader world, but it's different in societies which are not necessarily patriarchal, or at least that patriarchy does not mean subjugation. So I feel women in Indigenous societies are often empowered in their own communities, but almost completely disempowered in the broader society. This is an interesting conundrum, one which I don't have a solution to, but in thinking about using data to empower communities generally, data and information are critical to the ability for communities to make their own decisions, as well as participate in collaborative decisions. Generally, access to and the ability to analyze information leads to better decision making. Community empowerment means telling stories, including science and traditional stories, to each other, and if desired, building a more comprehensive database for analysis. It is often women who facilitate community gatherings, convince community, and collect information. Subsequently, that information must be able to influence outcomes. Governmental agreements need to commit to the application of Indigenous law as well as Canadian law. This is a new legal paradigm and really a time of opportunity. There are many Indigenous women, lawyers, community researchers, and others working in this space as well, working at all levels of community, both empowered and empowering. The results of this work need to be applied. In Canada, this application requires government-to-government agreements. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, has certainly created space in a lot of countries for the reinvigoration of Indigenous laws and protocols. As we look forward to how we'd like to see a more just society, what needs to happen with the use of Earth observation data? As the authority of Indigenous legislative frameworks are increasingly recognized and reinvigorated, the role of Earth observation data has arguably more ability to influence resource use decisions than if the dominance of Western societal structures continue. Because Earth knowledge has inherently more authority within Indigenous societies, and we increasingly recognize the validity of these systems, we may see greater influence of Earth observation data on behavior. Climate change is an interesting example. Despite overwhelming data, there is little influence on behavior in the dominant society. As the world, hopefully, becomes more indigenized, Earth observation data may have more ability to influence behavior. Incorporating new information into decision-making requires understanding of the process of generating that knowledge and its relevance to community decisions. I think most communities recognize that Earth's observation data is important to decision-making. In order to use that data, Indigenous communities need to build data management structure which enables the analysis of scientific, Earth observation, and traditional information. Once that analysis occurs, the results will be used to guide behavior in relation to all that exists. This shift is supported by the creation of governmental agreements that require adherence to the analytical results. Thanks for listening. This is a huge topic, and I've attempted to share some of my experience and thoughts. I'm happy to follow up. Please get in touch if you have questions. Hi.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you very much. So our final speaker for this session is Titus. Our final speaker for this session is Titus. Titus is from the Samburu tribe in Kenya, and is also the co-founder of the GEO Indigenous Alliance and the managing director of the Sarara Foundation. So Titus today will speak to us about the challenges facing Samburu men and women. And I think this would be really interesting because while he's speaking directly to the challenges that face men and women in the society. Welcome, Titus.
So ladies and gentlemen, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let me also take this opportunity again to talk about women empowerment within the Samburu community and across the globe. In terms of women empowerment, women in our community faces a lot of challenges. One being a lack of recognition by the elders. Sometimes they are not given position to, or maybe opportunities to lead, or to give this, or to make a decision on behalf of their families or maybe their communities. They also lack exposure in terms of information and technology. Nearly 90% of women within our community have never gone to school, meaning that they can't access to information and technology. When it comes to climate change, women within our communities, or maybe within the Samburu Indigenous community, bears the greatest burden of drought, primarily because of labor division. The role that the women play include fetching water for the family, taking care of the kids, maybe making sure that food is on the table, fetching firewood, or maybe making sure there's firewood to make to cook food. So you'll find that when it's dry, then livestock also moves away from the homestead or from the community area in search of pasture and water. And then this means that the women are left and children are left vulnerable to malnutrition or maybe to drought. Again, they do hard work, walking long distances in search of water and firewood. Women are also, in our culture, also affected by harmful cultural practices like women genital mutilation, FGM. In our tradition, we still practice that tradition, and sometimes creating awareness to elders. Sometimes it's very hard for us to do that, though we have a responsibility ourselves to create more awareness within the community. Early marriages is still maybe strongly followed by within the community that we are also trying to address as a foundation. Things like maybe engaging young girls when they're still very young, that leads to early pregnancies or maybe unwanted pregnancies. It's also becoming another challenge. So we create to the community, to the elders and others, to make them understand that these harmful practices are maybe affecting our women and children, and are also coming up with the better traditions or better ways in doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Titus. So I think now we'll go into answering a couple of questions that we have for all the speakers. If we could turn on our cameras. Okay, thank you. So I have a couple of general questions and specific questions for our speakers. So the first question is to Dr. Robbie. I was just going through your profile and looking at some of the projects that you've done, and we're interested in knowing what is the one research or discovery that you've known or you have done that you think was the most mind-blowing in your experience in this field.
Yeah, thank you. And first off, you don't have to call me Dr. Robbie. You can just call me Robbie.
Okay.
I don't have a PhD. So, yeah, I think the most mind-blowing thing was the project I mentioned during my talk, where we used a high-altitude drone. This is an unmanned aircraft system, and we flew it out, many, many miles out over a hurricane, and we were able to drop these little devices called dropsondes from the aircraft. And we're, the pilot flying this aircraft is sitting in Florida, but the drone is out flying over the sea. But we were able to send messages to the drone and have it drop these little dropsondes. And as the dropsondes fell, they passed through the hurricane and collected temperature and pressure, and the things you want to know about the hurricane. Yeah. That data, as the device was dropping, the data were sent back to the drone, and the drone sent the data back to us. And we were able to take it from there and put it into the weather forecast models, on an experimental basis. And then a year later, after we did all the analysis, we found that by having that data in real time, it could actually improve the weather forecast, the hurricane forecast. Because the important thing about hurricanes is you want to know where it's going to go and how intense it's going to be. And it actually improved both the intensity and the tracking forecast of the hurricane for the next, 6 hours, 12 hours, whatever. And that's really important for people who are on coastlines that are worrying about a storm coming. Unfortunately, the agency decided they didn't want to invest. They didn't have the money to purchase, that kind of a system. But at least we proved that it works. So I'm hopeful that someday, somebody will go back and look at that technology again and try to use it. But it was my highlight because it was an experiment that from beginning to end, we were able to prove the operational value of it.
Oh, that's amazing. So this is probably the biggest technology evolution or the biggest technology thing that you're looking forward to.
Yeah, well, you know, in my career too, I'd like to say was a lot of it was built on big satellites and big aircraft and work things like that. But as I got closer to retirement, I really started realizing that, you know, local communities, you know, you shouldn't have to be able to leave your community and work for a NASA and, you know, just to be able to be part of collecting data, using data, and understanding how it affects your community. So really now that I'm in retirement, I'm looking at much smaller systems and local, you know, local networks, because I really think it's time to level the playing field so that all communities have access to data and can feel comfortable about data and how it's, you know, and how they understand their communities.
Okay. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you very much. So my next question, I think this will be a twofold question, and I think we can have Maria and Titus answer this question. So this is a question on how can we better support your communities, and probably also in line with that, how do you think we will be able to improve our reach to young women in probably rural settings or in actual communities to be able to access STEM?
Yeah, maybe I can start. Good evening, Carol.
Hi,
and thank you for moderating this session. I think, as I said earlier, women within our traditions, especially indigenous people, are still facing a lot of challenges. Not necessarily the Samburu tribe alone or community alone, but I think all the pastoralist communities in the northern part of the country are facing a lot of challenges in terms of either cultural practices or maybe access to information and other things. So I think maybe the best way we can support these communities to overcome these challenges, one is creating awareness, making sure that the community is able to understand, especially the impact maybe the bad practices as to women and young girls. Again, in ensuring that these maybe the young girls access to basic education, because once the girls goes to school, maybe get a formal education, then definitely cultural practices will continuously reduce. Number two, again, is that we also need to create opportunities for traditional or maybe indigenous people. For example, in my tribe, you'll find that women are not given equal opportunities to men, or maybe boys are given more priorities within the setup. So if let's say we have policies, the national government has already developed policies to support that. But what is lacking there is awareness within the local community or the indigenous people, because road infrastructure and other infrastructure development is very poor. So if we have infrastructure development within these communities where the national government will access and other development partners also can reach out to these communities, then they will be able to understand even the legislation which is there. So I think, to me, we need to develop capacity to these communities on these practices. Number two, again, as we continue talking about the Earth observation data, the indigenous people, especially northern part of Kenya, are not aware of that, and even accessing internet or even mobile phones is not an easy thing here, like maybe in the Western or maybe in other countries or in other areas. We even have some areas mobile phones have not yet even reached those areas. So I think maybe also ensuring that maybe access to internet and access to maybe network or signals is available in all areas. Tourism is available, maybe is prime in northern part of the country, but you'll find that even infrastructure development, road network is very poor. So I think maybe partners, international development partners, need to come in and support these communities, the indigenous people, so that maybe they can also access to information and development.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Titus. So just before Maria comes in, I like that you introduced the aspect of government policies and probably having an all-inclusive agenda in women empowerment. There's a notion that goes that we are raising young girls who are empowered, but we are forgetting to raise boys who can deal with the empowered girls or women. I don't know what you think of that, and I think I'd also like Maria to chip in on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of basic education, I mean, I'm representing Lendos Leopard Network, and we're 5 regions. It's Mongolia, Republic of Buryatia, Russian Federation, Altai Republic, Russian Federation, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And overall, basic education is, first of all, it's mandatory and it's available, to both genders, boys and girls. In my opinion, I think it's really about elevating the status of STEM field in general, regardless of gender, because it does seem that there is lack of people going into or wanting to pursue education in those fields, as it's not considered to be prestigious, or there's actually maybe a lack of adequate preparation to go into this field, before enrolling to universities. And I think that especially for Indigenous youth and Indigenous females, it would be absolutely necessary for universities, especially the so-called elite universities, to really emphasize on also including traditional Indigenous knowledge curriculum into their basic academic curriculum. So therefore, having this Indigenous knowledge plus STEM, I believe it will bring a very, very fruitful results, and therefore it will bring this prestige, this knowledge, and this desire to really express yourself in both worlds. You're not losing your Indigenous cultural identity, but at the same time you're learning this invaluable skills that will not only will better your community, but will better the world as well.
Thank you, Maria. And there's a question that just came in from Brita. I'd like to know if you notice a shift of women's social status within their communities caused by the role of your organizations in the International Organization of Activism. Did you catch that?
Is there? I'm so sorry. Could you please repeat that again? I don't think I caught that.
There's a question from Brita. They wanted to know whether you have noticed a change in shift of women's understanding of women empowerment based on your work in activism.
Okay, and it's a question for all of us.
Yes. It's a question.
Okay.
A question for
so
everyone.
If I can, so probably yes. So with our work, it's really about bringing communities together and revival of traditional Indigenous knowledge, cultural and spiritual revival, because. If you look at the regions where we're working, those regions were either part of the Soviet Union, or were part of this kind of socialist republic structure at that time. And for more than 70 years, there's been a big, repression on, the cultural and spiritual rights of our people. And I think that in terms of, what I truly believe, what our work is not just protection and conservation of snow leopard as this beautiful animal, or is this, even if it is considered to be a sacred totemic animal for many indigenous communities in this area. And what we do, and maybe it's a very bold statement, but what we do in this work, in reviving this knowledge and working to for conservation of snow leopard and its ecosystem, really it goes beyond gender. It goes beyond those biases or whatever. With all due respect, maybe other fields and communities may be facing, because we know that when we revive the respect to the snow leopard and its ecosystems, and protecting nature mostly from the traditional indigenous perspective, and combining Western conservation practices, that's what pushes us forward. And to be honest, we just go beyond the gender question, because it just happens that all of us were able to work together.
Yeah. Thank you, Maria. So I have a question there's a question for Gwen, or I think this could be answered by Gwen. Jackson would like to. Could someone please mute their mic so I don't hear an echo? Yeah. So this is a question from Jackson. I would like to find out how one can develop a protocol for biodiversity conservation in my community, which is a hill rich in indigenous medicinal plants.
That's a question about how to develop a protocol for biocultural conservation in a place rich with medicinal and traditional use plants.
Yes.
Well, I think it depends on the context within which you're operating, your relationships with whatever governments are surrounding you, the opportunities you have to develop partnerships, and the ability you have to negotiate agreements which reflect the needs both of your culture and of the plant communities. So it's really a context-dependent question, one that requires that understanding, as well as really what you need to do, what you want to do, what your vision is for that protection and use of those lands going forward. So I can't really give a prescription because it is so dependent on context.
Okay. There was also another question. There was also another question on some of the examples on whether you could highlight some of the examples of Earth observation empowered projects that actually impacted or supported the conversation around women empowerment.
So the question is, what are the examples wherein women are demonstrating this empowerment within their community to change outcomes?
Yes, based on use of Earth observation data.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. One of the communities I'm working with has evolved to demonstrate the role of women in community decision making much more robustly than was the case formerly, because there is in Canada we have the imposition of a democratic government on Indigenous communities, and that's the way that things have been doing. And so part of the empowerment, like Maria says, is not just about women, but it's about community empowerment overall. And so as we shift back to increasing reflections and implementation of traditional-based governance, the role of women in community decision-making becomes really important and really highlighted. So when they're thinking about how they're going to into community, what they're doing now in this really intensive community decision-making process is bringing that Earth observation information to community, to the elders, to women's groups, to men's groups, to youth groups. And so being able to, for women to be able to have the ability to communicate that Earth observation information, whether it's via Google Earth or whether it's via climate change modeling applications, being able to take the time to introduce community, make community familiar with all of that information, and have those conversations around how community can integrate that information within their own understanding. There's a lot of skills and a lot of work that women do to make that possible. So I think that that's really a really cool learning curve in the way that they're able to do that. And then the community comes along all at once. Like a lot of decisions in those Indigenous communities I work for are community-based decisions, right? They're not done by the chief. The chief is sort of this figurehead or spokesperson, right? They're done, and they're not done by council. They're done by community and then relayed to what we call leadership, sort of in today's context. So it's really important for women to be able to do that. So, and then the decisions that community is making around how they want to pursue their options for the future in relation to land management come out of that. But it was created by the ability of women to have those conversations, which are both predicated on Indigenous knowledge and this Earth observation data. So it's really, really cool.
Okay. I think we'll take one last question, or a second last question, and this is directed to Robbie. Have citizen science networks helped you in your work post NASA or post NOAA with data collection in the local or tribal communities? For example, the GLOBE program.
Yeah, I'm just getting started in my new efforts, and so I'm really interested by citizen science networks, and I've been trying to examine those. But I'm also looking at new paradigms of how we collect weather data. Right now in the United States, the federal government funds most of how we collect the information that we need. But especially in the drone industry, as people start to fly drones around all over the place, they're going to need real-time data, high spatial resolution data that tells them what's going to happen. So I'm actually involved with a group of private industry folks that are trying to set standards for how to collect weather data. But we're also worried about how are you going to pay for weather data? And I think private industry is going to have to step up and fund these kinds of things. So I'm very interested in citizen science networks and how they pull information together. But I'm also interested, are there going to be new economic opportunities? And I really think it could be if we can figure out the correct pricing structure or how to pay for it, but that communities, especially rural communities or tribal communities, indigenous communities, underrepresented communities, could use this as a way to collect data for themselves, for their own decision making, but then perhaps sell it or provide it as an economic tool to a broader, weather coalition. So those are the kinds of things that I'm interested in. I have not done a lot of boots on the ground work right now with citizen science networks, but I'm very interested in that and really have been excited about participating in this summit just to get to know some other folks that maybe I can, hook up with and continue to share ideas with.
Perfect. So there's one last question for everyone. Is anyone aware of data or coding education initiatives specifically targeted towards Indigenous women? This could be probably locally organized initiatives that do this, probably data collection and coding education.
I'll just jump in and say that I don't know of any myself, but I did want to pick up on the question that you brought up earlier about the prestige of women rising, as they become more involved with geosciences. And I'll just say, as an old lady who started, my career in the 80s, if I could have started my career with a little more confidence in myself, when I got started, I think my career would have, been even better. I mean, I did a fine job. I had a really fun career, but I just think making sure that women have the confidence when they walk into a room that they are considered experts and treated that way, I think it's extremely important. And I think it really goes to what Titus is saying. I mean, he's dealing with a whole entire village culture where they're trying to, lift up the confidence of women. But regardless of what country you're in, women really need to feel comfortable, and we need to encourage women to have the confidence that they know what they're talking about.
Thank you. Anyone wants to give a go for the question on data or coding initiatives? Okay, I see Stephen has highlighted that GEO has a citizen science community activity in the GEO work program. Okay then, thank you very much. The final question was how people are going to get in touch with you. From some of your presentations, we got contacts from the last slides, but there's also a Slack channel that everyone can join in, and all the participants can interact in the Slack channel, so we can exchange contacts in the Slack channel. Okay, yeah, I think that's it for our questions. Thank you very much, Robbie. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Titus, and thank you, Gwen. We've really learned a lot about you and the work that you do and the support that you're giving to your communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next part of this session, we're going to go into lightning talks. And this will be very short talks from people in the industry who are also doing amazing things with regards to women empowerment. So this session, the first speaker for this session is Minnie, who is an indigenous Kankanoi Igoro activist from the Cordillera in Philippines and the director of the Indigenous Peoples Program at the Conservation International. So she's going to be talking to us about the transfer of knowledge. This is on gender and intergenerational considerations in indigenous communities. Welcome, Minnie.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Naimbag ay aldaw taku amin. I am Minnie Degawan, a Kankanai Igorot from the Cordillera, Philippines, joining you today from the traditional lands of the Piscaway people here in Maryland. I work with Conservation International as the director of the Indigenous and Traditional Peoples Program. In my community, women are the transmitters of traditional knowledge to the young boys and girls. Boys and girls in my community get their first lessons from our mothers, aunts, and elder sisters. In our day-to-day work in the fields, we get to learn the value of each and every living thing that we see on the field. And as we grow older, we also learn about the relationships of not just the living things, but also the non-living things. And as we grow older, we get knowledge not just from the women in the community, but from the men itself. What is important when we talk of traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples is that this knowledge is rooted on the relationship with the land and the resources of indigenous peoples. If the land is threatened, traditional knowledge is threatened. And today, in many countries of the world, indigenous peoples are being threatened because of their opposition to large projects coming into their territories. Indigenous women being at the front lines of the defense for ancestral land are also being criminalized, arrested, and outrightly killed. Therefore, for us to be able to talk about respecting, acknowledging, and even incorporating traditional knowledge in all the things that we do, we have to first address this very real threat to indigenous men and women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minnie. So our next speaker is Nicole. Nicole is a member of the Demins Keklo First Nation. She's an assistant professor at the University of North Dakota. She's the co-founder and chair of the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation, and she's going to be talking to us about empowering women in planetary health. Welcome, Nicole.
Hello, my name is Dr. Nicole Redvers, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Dakota in the U.S., and also a member of the Deninukoy First Nation in Northern Canada, where I hold my roots. And I'm pleased to be speaking about empowering women in planetary health, lessons from Indigenous knowledge. The world has changed. We have went from a circular and natural worldview to a square synthetic worldview. And as the artist of this powerful image, Katie Douglas, stated, that as the greed of industry spreads, it is impossible not to see the direct correlation between detrimental environmental practices and their impacts on women with regard to health, culture, and actions of violence. And from this, she was inspired to create an image that could begin to express humanity's violation of the earth as a parallel to humanity's violation of the women's bodies. The land is our mother, so when we lose value for the land, people lose value for the women, says Vanessa Gray. With this, the risk and actualization occurring in many areas with the tokenization of Indigenous traditional knowledges without the consequent support for Indigenous land and place rights ensures the continued marginalization of Indigenous people's knowledge over they themselves as people and communities, but especially our Indigenous women. Planetary health itself, in its Western conceptualization, has been stated as a field focused on characterizing the linkages between human-caused disruptions of Earth's natural systems and the resulting impacts on public health. From our Indigenous perspective, there is no separation between ourselves and that of the Earth, with complete interconnections existing that precludes an isolated definition. We as women are water carriers. This is both for the protection of the earth and the protection of the water we carry within the amniotic fluid, nourishing our babies as they grow within inside of us. Water protector is our current responsibility as women. Both water bodies need to be healthy and are rooted home for wellness in the community to be possible. Also, the blood that flows through our veins is like the water that flows through Mother Earth. We are in a state of relationship that is key to achieving a good life, fostering the development of the relationship between one body and the earth. So when we think about planetary health, we can think of it as being nested into an interconnected relationship with other innate and applied knowledges, which then impact the health of our communities and ecosystems. This bidirectional impact of various nested levels is incredibly important as we help to form our reality just as much as we are bound by some constants. With this, our women's role in these nested levels cannot be underestimated due to our innate connection with Mother Earth. We must take this responsibility seriously and continue to speak up for her and all the sacred relatives she holds. Masicho, and thank you for your
Thank you, Nicole. Please remember to post in your questions on Slido, slido.com, and the key or the passcode is GEO Indigenous Summit, which is one word. Capital G, capital I, and capital S. Please post in your questions, and then we're going to ask the speakers all these questions at the end of this session. So our next speaker is Karen, who is a senior director at Ecological Monitoring, Moore Center for Science. She's going to be speaking to us about observations to support Indigenous-led land management. Welcome, Karen.
Engagement and assessing communities' use of Earth observations. We all know that Indigenous peoples are a key stakeholder group for addressing global challenges like biodiversity loss and climate change. We also know that Indigenous managed lands have significantly lower rates of deforestation and forest degradation than lands outside their management. However, increasingly, Indigenous managed lands are under threat from illegal logging and mining activities, as well as infrastructure projects, like this picture of this bridge that was built in 2009 near the Alto Maya Reserve in Peru. We also know that Indigenous peoples lack equitable access to technologies and tools such as Earth observations that can help them in monitoring and mapping their lands.
Conservation International is addressing these inequities through one project called Earth Observations for Indigenous-led Land Management. This is a NASA-funded project that's also affiliated with the GEO, and the aim of the project is to increase the access and use of Earth observations and monitoring and mapping tools to inform decision-making and enhance natural resources management.
Today, I'd like to focus on a needs assessment we did with the communities in Peru and Ecuador. The aim of the assessment was to apply best practices for stakeholder engagement to understand how this subset of Indigenous communities currently approach sustainable land management and how they may be able to leverage Earth observations to enhance those decisions. We purposely sought to include women in the assessment. Seeking participation from women is challenging. They're very busy. They often have child care duties. The women we were talking to were more hesitant to speak with us. The women were not comfortable signing consent forms because many of them could not read. So we had to come up with ways to ensure that we were getting their consent, that they agreed to participate in the assessment. We also met with women in separate groups. We had women who were facilitating those groups, so we hoped that the women would feel more comfortable to speak up, but it was still challenging. Many of them were hesitant to contribute their ideas. We did also invite them to bring children to the assessment, and we also let them know that it was okay for them to come and go freely as needed if they needed to attend to household work. We did find that including women's participation in the assessment was extremely valuable. First, women were key observers of the forest. They frequently walked in the forest and collected medicinal plants. They also see illegal activities happening. The women also indicated more holistic threats to the community, mostly related to health issues, and these issues did not come up in the discussions with the men.
By consulting with the communities to understand their land management goals and needs, we were able to identify a few Earth observation applications that may be useful to the community, mostly related to patrolling and monitoring deforestation and threats. These were needs that were identified by both the men and the women. The one surprising outcome from the assessment, which was identified in the women-only group, was the potential to use Earth observations for monitoring water quality.
In conclusion, engaging women to participate in these assessment took more effort and required creativity sometimes to ensure their participation, but it was essential to the assessment as women are key forest observers, and the women we engaged with provided more holistic views of threats to their communities. I would like to thank my co-authors, Patricia Dunn, Carolina Rosero, Christian Martinez, Eddie Mendoza, the participants from the Awahun in Peru, and participants from the Ashuar Nation and Ecuador. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Minnie. So we're going to take the next couple of minutes to answer some questions that we have. We can do this randomly, or we can do this according to how the questions came in. So my first question is actually to Karin, to talk to us about the change in design for your need assessment. Did this directly impact the time it takes to deliver a project, or was the impact on this directly to reach women and to access more women in your projects?
Hi, Caroline. Thank you. Yes, well, we we purposely had these workshops, and we brought together multiple communities, surrounding communities. This is in Ecuador and Peru. One of the challenges is that the women couldn't travel from other communities. So when we were bringing people together, it was only the men that were able to travel. And so therefore we could only include the women that were living in that community. Again, they have household duties. They have to go back and forth. They have children to take care of. So that was one of the limitations, is that they were still underrepresented, even though we were purposely trying to include their participation. There's much fewer women that we could pull in to participate. And it does, yes, it takes longer. We had to, it was a lot of effort. We had to come up with activities for the children as well, because to entertain the kids that came along. So there was all of a sudden you're kind of thinking of creative tasks for children, and you're trying to conduct a workshop at the same time. But it definitely it was over several days, and it definitely took a lot longer. And especially the process of gaining consent. We had went through an internal review board, and we had all this approval for this written consent form saying that the participants will write consign and say, we agree to participate. But when we were there, the women didn't want to sign them, and so it was a lot of like, oh no, what do we do? We want their participation. How do we make them feel comfortable? And how do we legally get consent for them to participate? And so we had to kind of think on our feet and be and provide oral consent and just like verbal consent, and that was kind of one of the ways that we could move forward. But I'd say it takes a lot more creativity and energy and flexibleness, like being very flexible when you're going into these.
Amazing. Let's see another question. Talked about additional measures required. Oh, I think this is what you've just answered. So I have another question for Nicole, who spoke to us about traditional Indigenous knowledge. Do you think we currently have a challenge of probably a huge generational gap in transferring this Indigenous knowledge? And can you speak to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredibly important problem. As we say in many of our communities, our libraries are burning. And we have a short period of time to be able to ensure that our next generation is coming up. We've at the University of North Dakota just started a PhD program in Indigenous Health. It's the first one in North America that takes a two-eyed seeing approach that Albert Marshall in Mi'kmaq territory in Canada has outlined, which is using one eye with the Indigenous ways of knowing and using the other eye with the Western eyes of knowing, and bringing those together within an academic program that starts early on, where we're able to get school-aged children to come to the university during the summertime and learn STEM activities. We also take tribal teachers within the communities into the university setting at no cost for 6 weeks to upgrade their STEM skills so that they could go back into the communities and be able to strengthen the relationship. But in those STEM programs, we're incorporating traditional knowledge. For example, how can we assess the physics of the drum when the beat is going with the handle? How can we consider the plants as medicinal agents and consider them in the concepts of biology or chemistry, and leveraging the benefits of both knowledge systems within the learning capacity of children as they grow up, and mobilizing our elders as much as we can within councils to facilitate those opportunities for intergenerational transfer, which is so incredibly important.
Thank you. There's another question that just came in for you. Given connections between planetary and public health, can you comment on the insights from Indigenous knowledge that can apply to current or future pandemics?
Yeah, this is such a hot topic right now, because we know very clearly that forest deforestation will increase the risk factors of future pandemics coming. So the direct relationship between our environmental rights, environmental justice, and the impacts for all humanity going forward. And I think this is now an opportune time for Indigenous knowledges worldwide to really be premised in foundation due to the need to not only uphold Indigenous knowledges, but to uphold Indigenous peoples and the lands. And I think we see that very clearly with the lands right movement that has popped up over the following past few months, with communities standing up and saying, look, this is a part of the answer to climate change is Indigenous land rights. We can't only work to mine knowledge from communities. We need to be able to protect their communities so that they can stay, and we're not repeating a second wave of colonization from people forced from their lands due to contamination or lack of water. So definitely a huge connection between public health, and it's why I'm in these spaces. I'm a clinician, but I also work in public health. We need to have more interdisciplinary looks because our people are interdisciplinary. Indigenous people are scientists in many different fields, and how we're able to think holistically is what gives us strength. And I think we can make great waves as women, but also as Indigenous people.
Great. There was a question for Minnie, but I think you can take this on, since I feel like your work, there's a strong intersection between your work and her work. What have been your biggest key learnings in your experience, and how do you think probably younger people can learn from your experience and try to probably encourage the future generation?
Yeah, it's amazing with our current first cohort of PhD. It's unheard of to have a full graduate class of Indigenous students at the graduate level, and it's been amazing to see these learners come up. And I often reflect how important it was for ceremony and spirituality to be the frame of our relationships in our work, and being able to use spirituality and prayer and ceremony to foundation our learning just gives that confidence that I think it was Robbie was talking about before, that some of our Indigenous girls lack in the communities. They're sometimes hesitant to speak out, but I really see a strong connection between young girls who are participating in ceremonies and their confidence going forward in their life, bringing those traditional ways back as a powerful tool of confidence building, and giving them the strength that they need to be able to go on to do things like STEM sciences or whatever it is that they decide to do. So for me, it's always been my elders that have given me the motivation and the strength, thinking the struggles that they've went through in their lifetime, and how the previous 7 generations before us really were praying for us right now where we are as Indigenous people. So that's very powerful in how we move forward in our lives.
Thank you. While I was preparing for these sessions, I came across some modern uses of social media for transferring of Indigenous knowledge, and one of these was there was actually a very large group of young people on TikTok who use the hashtag native TikTokers, and they use TikTok as a platform to educate each other on rituals and traditions and singing and dancing. And I think it's a really powerful movement out there, going on out there. Yeah. Thank you. So I have a final question for Karine, which is in line to land management and the changes and development in land ownership and land management. So you see, traditionally, a lot of land was communal, but with the changes in land ownership and protocols and policies around land ownership, this is quickly changing. So we see a lot of communities losing land, and this land being taken up by individual users. What are your thoughts on that, and how this affects transfer or being Indigenous knowledge in a community?
Thank you, Caroline. That's actually a really difficult question to answer. One, because I'm not a land tenure expert at all. I'm a remote sensing specialist. So, so I don't want to say anything mistakenly, because I just know that there's all sorts of different ways of land tenure, and like at CI, because we're global, we often there's just so many different ways to kind of you can't even define it specifically. So I actually think I'm going to have to pass because it's just like not my expertise. I can only speak for the experiences that I've had with the communities that we've worked with in this project, but Minnie would be way better of a person to answer that because that is her deep expertise.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I don't think this is directed to anyone. Do we have any other questions? Okay. I don't think so, but thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nicole. Thank you very much, Karin, for taking the time to educate us on this. I've learned a lot myself. I think this brings my session to an end. But I'd like to invite everyone to come back to this link or to come back to the conference at 5 p.m. CET time for the food security session. Thank you.